Hello everyone. So today we are going to study what happens when you type a URL in your browser. So like you are doing this dozens of time every day, right? But you rarely think about it. Like what actually happens when you type in a URL in your browser, right? And press enter, right? Like this could seem like a simple action trigger, but in the background there is an incredible sequence of events that is happening across the global internet infrastructure. So by the end of this presentation you'll have a solid understanding about the journey of your web request, like how it is propagated from your keyboard all along the way to servers across the world and back to your screen. Okay, so let's dive in. So the journey of a web request. Okay, so these are the typical steps that will be followed in a web request. So which is DNS resolution, TCP connection, TLS handshake, load balancing. We are going to deep dive into each of this component. Okay, but like your browser typically needs to figure out where to send the request, and it needs to establish a secure connection. So in order to figure out where to send the request, it is done with the help of DNS. Okay, and in order to establish a secure connection, it is done by TCP connection. Okay, and to get the request to the right server, we use load balancer, we process it, and we finally display the results. So each of these component is very important. Okay, okay, and so moving on. So now suppose you went into a URL. Okay, suppose example.com or suppose google.com. Okay, so what will happen here is that the browser will pass the URL. So there is a protocol. So typically we use HTTP HTTPS protocol. Okay, so you type in that. Okay, so the browser will pass it into individual components. So protocol, it is HTTPS, then the domain name is www.example.com. Okay, and there is a path as well, additional path, like you are requesting an additional resource, you are submitting a form, you are doing anything, so it comes after the com. So com slash maybe page number, something like that. In this we have nothing, so the path is simple root. Okay, so the browser faced this challenge. Okay, so what is this, like the domain name should be human readable, right? But the browser can understand only the numbers, only the IP addresses, like which server it needs to redirect the request to. So it needs the server's numerical IP address. So now, but human cannot understand number or remember numbers, right? It won't make sense for you to remember a lot of numbers because there are a lot of websites. So you need a name, right? So DNS helps you resolve this particular thing. Okay, DNS helps you locate the IP address. So if you type in example.com, so it will help you to figure out the number, the IP address associated with this particular name. Okay, so uh, so what is DNS? Okay, so DNS translates domains to IP address. Okay, like it acts like internet phone book. Okay, you need the IP address for example.com, and your browser would first check if it is already having that information cached. So it will firstly check in the local cache. So if it is not available in the cache, so it will send a query to a recursive resolver. Okay, so it is typically operated by your ISP only. Okay, and if it is not cached, so it will start through a journey of the DNS hierarchy. So it will first contact a root server. So there is a root server, so which typically contains all the IP addresses. Okay, then the root server will redirect to the top level domain server. So uh, so there are different servers. Okay, so consider it as a simple hierarchy only for now, and that server will point to the name server for this example.com, which will finally return the IP address we need. And you might be thinking like there is a bunch of steps happening, so it might take a lot of time. So trust me, this step only take milliseconds only. Okay, it happens very fast. So moving on. So so in order to establish a TCP connection, so now the next step is we need a TCP connection. Like, so now we have this server's IP address. Now it went through a TCP connection, so which ensure data delivery across the internet. It is basically a data communication protocol. So it follows a three-way handshake kind of mechanism. So client, which is your browser, it sends a packet like can we talk? Okay. So it is basically a synchronized packet. Like typically your browser is saying, I want to establish a connection. And the server will respond. Basically it will acknowledge, okay, I received a request and I'm ready to accept the connection. Okay, things like that. So the browser will send an acknowledgement packet to confirm like the connection is established. So it is just a three-way handshake. Client sends a request to the server, then server responds, and client says, okay, connection is established. So in this way, the connection is established. Okay, and this connection will be maintained for all the data transfer between your browser and the server. Okay. Now, when you are working with this particular thing, the HTTPS site, okay, so you need a secure connection because you don't want anyone to drop in and kind of steal your data. Okay, so it happens with the help of TLS. TLS stands for Transport Layer Security, because we are working on the transport layer, that is the data sending part. Okay, so it begins with like the browser will send a message, like the client will send hello. Okay, like it will typically indicate like what all encryption methods are there, what all encryption methods it supports, and the server will respond with server hello. Okay, so server will say agree on an encryption method that will be used and a certificate in order to validate it. Then the browser will validate that particular certificate, okay, to ensure that the server is legitimate, okay, and we are connecting to the right place. And the browser and server then exchange the encryption keys. Okay, so in order to this is all done to make a secure connection. Okay, and once both of the client and the server will exchange the keys, the secure connection is established, and this entire process will ensure that all the data that is transmitted between the browser and the server, it is encrypted and it is secure from eavesdroppers, because there is a lot of data drop-ins that could happen. Okay, then this next step is load balancing. Okay, so like if there is a popular website, suppose Netflix, Google, Facebook, okay, so these websites use multiple servers because obviously a single server could not handle all the traffic that is coming, right? So for that we use load balancers. Okay, so whenever a request on a website reaches the website IP address, so it will firstly go to the load balancer only. First it will go to load balancer, okay, and it will help distribute the traffic among the servers, because if it would go to the server directly, the server could be overloaded. So load balancer ensures that the server doesn't get overwhelmed and it kind of maintains this thing. Okay, so it kind of improves the performance, it is good for fault tolerance, and users will not face a lag because there are multiple servers supporting a request, and load balancer ensures that a request is fulfilled. Okay, so also load balancer works on two different layers. If you might have heard of load balancer, so it works in application as well and it works in the transportation as well. So it works in L4 layer and L7 layer. So currently we are working on the L4 layer, okay, which is the transport layer. Okay, so it is basically for the routing which we are doing right now. So based on the IP address and based on the port, we the load balancer will transport the data. Okay, so and the L7, so you might have heard of load balancer a lot, that you are using in your application. So L7 is the one where you are using it inside your application. So they operate at the application level and L4 operates at the transport level. Okay, and if it is working in the L7 level, so it will select the backend server using certain algorithms like round robin, least connection, or response time based selections. Okay, we'll cover that in the next videos, but for now this is what a load balancer is. Okay, now next step is that server process the request. So once load balancer directly requests to a backend server. Once the request comes to the backend server, the processing begins. So there could be a web server that receives the request. Okay, and the web server can directly handle the static content and pass to the application server so that it could process it. And the application server could be any backend server, Node server, Java server, Python server, any server, okay, which has the logic of our application. And the application server executes the business logic to fulfill the request. And it can involve multiple processes, like the application server could in turn downstream like search for the data in the database, cache, retrieve the data, might be updating the data, or might be pushing the data in the database. Anything could be done. The request could be anything, okay? And like if you are logging into the website, so server might query the website to verify the credentials, right? And once the application has gathered all the necessary data, so it assembles an HTTP response. It creates a HTTP response with proper status code and the actual content, like whatever content it needs to deliver. It may be an HTML page or a JSON response or anything. And now the response is prepared by the backend server and it is prepared to be sent to the browser again so that the user could view it. Okay. So now, how the response comes. So now the HTTP response is prepared. Now it will back propagate to the browser. So the response goes from the backend server through the load balancer and through the internet via the TCP/IP connection. Okay, and the response can contain components like, so HTTP has various status code, like 200 says like, okay, the request is fulfilled successfully. Suppose it's 404, so it is not found. There are a bunch of status code, but 200 or 201 or anything related to 200 will show it is successful. 400 shows an error. Okay, so 404 means not found. Okay, there are a bunch of status code you can look upon. Okay, and it will also, the response will also contain certain headers or caching instruction or the body, okay, or images, JSON data, anything. So, and the TCP protocol, it ensures that all the packets, all the data that is necessary, it arrive correctly and in order, even if it has to take different routes through the internet. And once the browser receives the complete response, it can begin the final step, like rendering the content for the user. So now, browser rendering happens. So browser can receive data in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, anything. So it needs to parse all this data, right, into the visual content, in the visual page that you see. So browser parse the HTML document to create a document object model and CSS and everything, like how it should look on the page. So these are typically combined and rendered for the user, and then the browser at runtime only calculates the visible elements within each style and like how the exact layout of each element on the page should look, and it paints the pixel to your screen. Okay, so this is typically happening, and once the rendering is done, it will be shown to the user. So we have typically looked how the request comes from the browser, goes to the server, and again from the server to the browser. Okay, so now you got the idea, right? Like, and it is very instantaneous. Okay, and like, and there are a lot of systems working with this protocol only. Like, so what you have learned, like DNS translates the domain to an IP address. Okay, then TCP establish a connection, and the TLS secures that connection, and then comes the load balancer. So load balancer distributes the traffic, and the server processes the request and query the database, or it can do more things. Okay, and the response travels back through the internet, and finally your browser renders everything into a visual web page. So this entire process typically happens in maybe hundreds of milliseconds only. So you know now like how much engineering has shifted. Okay, so this is all about this particular lecture. If you have any doubts, please let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.